Your countries are going to hell. Your country is going to fail. There's climate change. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion. What is the purpose of the United Nations? Years ago in the 1920s and the 1930s, they said, global cooling will kill the world. We have to do something. Then they said global warming will kill the world. But then it started getting cooler, so now they could just call it climate change, because that way they can't miss. It's climate change.
Every year, the world turns its gaze to the United Nations General Assembly, where leaders from across the globe present their visions, grievances, and proposals. It is not just another diplomatic gathering. It is a showcase of global priorities and a theater of ideas where each word can ripple far beyond the walls of the UN headquarters. This year, U.S. President Donald Trump took that stage once again, delivering a speech that quickly captured headlines, stirred conversations, and offered a window into his approach to leadership on the world stage. From the moment his teleprompter malfunctioned, Trump signaled that this would not be an ordinary address. He told the delegates he would speak more from the heart. And indeed, the speech that followed was less about polished diplomacy and more about raw conviction. What emerged was a message that combined sharp critiques of migration and climate policy, commentary on global conflicts, skepticism about the role of the United Nations, and a series of unscripted tangents that made the address memorable. Today, we will break down the 5 major takeaways from Trump's UN speech, not as a list of bullet points, but as a flowing narrative that captures the essence of his words, their significance, and their potential impact. Migration, a lecture to the world. Migration was the dominant theme of Trump's remarks. From the podium, he turned his attention not only to the United States, but to Europe and other parts of the world grappling with migration flows. His words carried both a warning and a lesson, shaped by his own administration's policies on border control. He accused the United Nations of funding an assault on Western countries by supporting policies that, in his view, encourage migration without sufficient safeguards. His tone suggested that unchecked migration was not simply a political issue, but an existential threat to national identity and stability. If you don't stop people that you've never seen before, that you have nothing in common with, your country is going to fail, he said, capturing the urgency he wanted the world to feel. Trump reminded his audience of his approach in the United States, highlighting how detention and deportation policies led, in his words, to a sharp decline in illegal border crossings. For him, the lesson was clear: firm measures create deterrence. He suggested that European leaders in particular were allowing compassion and political correctness to overshadow the long-term preservation of their heritage. This portion of the speech was not only a defense of his own record, but also a direct challenge to other nations. Follow his example or face the consequences. It was both a lecture and an admonition, underscoring that migration remains central to his worldview. Climate change, the greatest con job. From migration, Trump moved to climate change, another area where his views diverge from much of the international community. While the UN has consistently emphasized climate change as one of the greatest challenges of our era, Trump rejected that narrative outright. He called climate change the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world. Dismissing scientific consensus and ridiculing past predictions of global catastrophe, he criticized green energy initiatives, portraying them as costly, misguided, and ultimately ineffective. According to Trump, such policies do not save the environment, but instead shift manufacturing and industrial activity away from nations that follow strict regulations to those that do not. In his framing, developed nations following insane rules end up at an economic disadvantage, while countries that bypass restrictions reap the benefits. All of these predictions made by the United Nations and many others, often for bad reasons, were wrong, he claimed. For Trump, climate policies were less about saving the planet and more about disadvantaging nations like the United States. His message resonated with a familiar theme. National sovereignty should outweigh global commitments when those commitments undermine economic competitiveness. By rejecting the climate agenda at the UN, Trump not only underscored his skepticism but also positioned himself as a defender of economic independence against what he sees as external pressures to conform. Conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza, limited during the speech, expanded after. When it came to the pressing conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza, Trump's speech offered less detail than some had anticipated. He acknowledged the challenges but did not provide major new policy directions during his address. He reiterated his opposition to recognizing a Palestinian state, describing it as a reward for Hamas, and he expressed frustration that peace in Ukraine remained elusive despite his relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. However, his most significant remarks on these conflicts came after the speech. In a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Trump suggested that NATO nations should consider shooting down Russian aircraft that enter their airspace. A comment that highlighted the risks of escalation, but also revealed his willingness to take a harder line. Later, on social media, he went further, suggesting that Ukraine could regain all of its territory with sufficient support, marking the first time he indicated such an outcome was possible. This shift was notable. It suggested that while Trump's speech emphasized critique and frustration, his follow-up comments revealed a more complex position. His willingness to suggest that Ukraine might fully restore its original borders contrasted with earlier statements about compromise, signaling a potential evolution in his stance. Broken equipment, broken trust. One of the more memorable features of Trump's speech was his use of malfunctioning equipment. A broken teleprompter and an escalator that stopped mid-ride, as metaphors for the shortcomings of the United Nations itself. With characteristic bluntness, he quipped, "These are the two things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter." Yet beneath the humor lay a serious critique. Trump questioned the very purpose of the UN, suggesting that it produces strongly worded letters without real follow-through. In his words, empty words don't solve war. His remarks implied that just as the machinery failed at crucial moments, so too does the institution falter when global crises demand decisive action. His frustration with the UN is not new. Over his political career, he has reduced U.S. contributions to the institution, cut funding for peacekeeping operations, and withdrawn from certain UN programs. In this speech, he returned to that theme, questioning whether the UN is truly effective in achieving its mission of promoting global peace and stability. By highlighting these equipment failures in a humorous yet symbolic way, Trump painted the UN as an organization stuck in inefficiency, unable to match its lofty rhetoric with tangible results. By pairing personal anecdotes with institutional critique, Trump reinforced his broader message that the UN, like its faulty equipment, is unreliable and in need of serious reform before it can meet the challenges of the modern world. Veering off script, a hallmark of his style. The final takeaway from Trump's address was the manner of its delivery. Beginning with a malfunctioning teleprompter, the speech quickly shifted into a free-flowing series of remarks that touched on topics as varied as crime in U.S. cities, Barack Obama's carbon footprint, and windmills. At one point, he quipped, "We don't want cows anymore. I guess they want to kill all the cows," leaving the audience puzzled and somewhat uncertain about his larger point. These digressions are characteristic of Trump's style, unfiltered, improvisational, and unpredictable. For his supporters, this can make him appear authentic and unscripted. For others, it raises questions about focus and coherence. Regardless, the effect is the same. His speeches rarely fade into the background, often becoming the subject of extended debate long after they conclude. Delegates at the General Assembly listened mostly in silence, a striking contrast to the laughter that greeted Trump in earlier years. Even as he extended well beyond the 15-minute speaking limit, his words carried an undeniable weight, demanding attention if not agreement. The silence itself seemed to show that world leaders were less amused this time and more intent on parsing his message, even when it diverged into unexpected commentary. This tendency to veer off script also tied into his broader critique of the UN and global leadership. For Trump, strict scripts and polished diplomacy are less important than speaking directly, even if that means straying into unexpected territory and testing the patience of his audience. In his view, spontaneity is not a flaw but a strength, signaling candor and conviction over carefully rehearsed performance. The bigger picture. 5 takeaways intertwined. When considered together, the 5 major takeaways from Trump's UN speech paint a clear picture of his worldview. Migration was framed as an existential challenge, climate change as a misguided distraction, global conflicts as areas where leadership is lacking, the UN as an ineffective institution, and his own delivery style as proof of authenticity over polish. These themes are not isolated. They are interconnected by a central thread: the belief that nations should prioritize sovereignty and strength above all else. Whether discussing borders, energy, or diplomacy, Trump consistently argued that international cooperation should never come at the expense of national identity, economic advantage, or political independence. His words carried a deliberate challenge to the prevailing global order, inviting supporters to embrace a vision rooted in resilience, uncompromising self-reliance, and the assertion that true leadership emerges not from consensus, but from unapologetic conviction. Closing reflections. What the speech means for the world. Trump's UN speech was more than a set of talking points. It was a statement of philosophy, a reaffirmation of his belief in sovereignty, and a critique of institutions and policies he sees as failing. For allies and critics alike, the speech offered insight into how he frames global issues through the lens of national strength, skepticism of multilateralism, and a preference for bold action over cautious compromise. For some, these takeaways reaffirm the need to defend national borders, question costly environmental policies, and demand accountability from global institutions. For others, they raise concerns about the future of international cooperation in addressing shared challenges like climate change and conflict resolution. What is clear is that Trump's words resonated far beyond the UN chamber. They sparked conversations about migration, climate, war, and the role of global governance. Conversations that are unlikely to fade soon. Trump's UN speech leaves us with questions that matter for every nation. How should the world balance sovereignty with cooperation? Can global institutions adapt to new realities, or are they destined to remain, as Trump suggested, stuck in bureaucracy? Now, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think Trump's focus on sovereignty and skepticism toward institutions like the UN is the right approach in today's interconnected world? Or do you believe global challenges demand stronger unity and collaboration? Share your perspective in the comments below. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this video with others who follow global affairs. Stay tuned for more in-depth, balanced coverage of the speeches, policies, and events that shape our world.